I was originally going to make a video about some of my favorite cards in my 5 favorite commander decks. And while I was making that video, I was tinkering around with the recommendation function on EDHREC's website, and I noticed that a lot of my favorite cards just so happen to be very uncommon in the average deck list. So I decided I wanted to actually make a different kind of video. I wanted to make a video talking about 5 of the most unpopular cards in some of my favorite commander decks. Let's start with my Simic Scry +1/+1 counter decks, which I call Scry Me a River. I know it's a Simic deck, we're going to get it out of the way. I promise I'm not that evil and I don't take up everyone else's time all the time. The commander for this deck is Elrond, Master of Healing? That's his name, Master of Healing. Basically, whenever you scry, however much you scry is however many +1/+1 counters you can distribute on your creatures. Then if anything gets targeted, you get a draw card. It's not too terrible, it's not landfall Simic, so you know there's that. But getting into it, the 5 most uncommon cards. So the percentage that I list with any of these cards is how many percent of decks that they show up in. So the 5 most uncommon cards are River's Rebuke, showing up in 15% of decks, Experimental Augury in 16, Inexorable Tide in 17, Cankerbloom in 18, and Curse of the Swine in 21. While the deck is built around scrying as one of the main functions allowing for the payoff, you naturally generate a ton of counters in this deck, so I have a lot of proliferate support, which makes sense for things like Inexorable Tide and Experimental Augury. But to be honest, the more that I've looked at this, the more that I've kind of realized Experimental Augury may need to go. It does have a scry effect of looking at the top 3 cards and putting them away, and choosing one and putting the rest on the bottom, and you proliferate, which is very nice. But frankly, it's just not that great. There are probably better scry cards that I could put in there, or better +1/+1 counter support. So this is kind of part of the video, is that I'm seeing what cards I may need to actually take out. But Inexorable Tide actually has a pretty important reason to be in the deck. Putting additional counters on Elrond, especially when commander damage is a big way you win with this deck, is pretty important. And there are also other proliferate support cards such as Simic Ascendancy, which can straight up let you win the game, especially when you have cards with like Mystic Speculation, which you're buying back, scrying a ton. An additional counter on each of those on Simic Ascendancy is huge. Another big card for proliferating is Lost Isle Calling, which has page counters on it, and then if you have, I believe, a certain amount of page counters on it, you can take an extra turn after that turn, which is huge. If I can't win with an extra turn off an enchantment, that's on me. So I think Inexorable Tide is a great fit in this deck. Frankly, I'm a little surprised more people aren't leaning into it, at least as some benefit, because +1/+1 counters kind of need proliferate, I think, to really get them going to be stronger. But moving on to the next one, Cankerbloom. Cankerbloom is a card that I think fits really well in this deck. I really value modal spells very highly. I think that they're super important in a commander deck because having flexibility is the name of the game. Being able to destroy an enchantment, an artifact, or give yourself that extra boost with proliferate, I think is huge. If I had to compare this card to an NBA player, I'm going Drew Holiday. I know that maybe people won't get that, but it's just the ultimate glue card. Like, it's a creature, I still get a trigger off of a lot of creature batters effects that I have in this deck. It's not an elf, I guess that's the only thing against it, but I think Cankerbloom has a spot in this deck very, very readily. Lastly, the last 2 cards that are unpopular are River's Rebuke and Curse of the Swine. And frankly, this just comes down to the fact that there are not a lot of great board wipes in Simic colors. I'm not trying to buy a Cyclonic Rift. That's not who I am. I don't even want to play it. That's a Game Changers now. I'm not dealing with that. But these still do what they need to do. I think Curse of the Swine is maybe a little bit better because it is actual removal rather than bouncing like River's Rebuke. But River's Rebuke can be fantastic against token decks. If you've got it down to 3 players or it's just you and another person, it can straight up win you the game. So I think that they're still valid for it. But frankly, I'm a bit surprised that River's Rebuke is the least popular card in the commander deck. 15% of cards friend River's Rebuke and Elrond. It's just, I don't know, to me it's a little bizarre. Okay, next on our list is my Megatron deck, turning away from Simic to the other 3 good colors of Magic outside of Simic. Mardu, Megatron the Tyrant. This deck focuses on Megatron's backside. Not that backside, you creep, but his backside where you sacrifice an artifact, he deals damage to a target creature equal to that artifact's converted mana cost. Any excess damage tramples over onto the controller. You go through combat. On your second main, he flips back over to his backside again, and you gain 1 generic mana for each 1 life your opponents have lost this turn. I love this card. I frankly think that people really sleep on this commander, and he can generate a ton of mana, and it's so much fun. It's a lot of complications in this commander. It's definitely not for everybody, but I think he's super fun. And getting into the 5 most unpopular cards I have in my commander list is Volcanic Geyser, 10%, Batwing Broom at 10%, Sentry Bot at 11, Hunter's Blowgun at 11, and Paladin Dance Steel Maverick at 12. And out of all of the cards in this video, out of all of the cards that I looked at, I'm the most surprised that people are not playing Volcanic Geyser in Megatron. Here's how I see it. I think there are 3 pretty valid general use cases for Volcanic Geyser in this deck. First, just straight up removal. It is a lightning bolt that you can pump to like 8, 10, a pretty big number. You can generate a lot with Megatron. It can deal a ton of damage. You can generate a ton of mana for you to pump into that to just kill someone, straight up just kill them. It can also be used to destroy a creature. Granted, black and white have stronger removal spells, but you don't always have access to that, and having that flexibility is important, especially if it's a creature that, say, you Blasphemous Act, deal 13 damage to it, and it's still up. You can do that extra damage with Volcanic Geyser, make sure it gets taken away, no problem. And lastly, you can use it as kind of a ramp spell. You can cast it before your main phase, or before combat, excuse me, on your main phase 1. Spend 2 red mana to deal a certain amount of damage to something, or to just a player. Go through combat, you get that mana back. It's just damage that you can put through, whatever, have that flexibility. Frankly, I think more people should be running this in Megatron. Out of all the cards that I looked at, this is the one that I feel pretty strongly that people need to be including in their decks. I also just really like putting X mana cost cards in Megatron because I think it's pretty fun. Like another card that was pretty unpopular was Debt to the Deathless, which is X 2 white 2 black, and each opponent takes X damage twice and you gain life equal to the life lost this way. I have won almost every game I've played with Megatron by using that card. It is so strong. It is an insane finisher, and people need to be playing it more. Next, moving on to Batwing Broom. This is actually a card I saw from an MTG Goldfish podcast episode, and I love it. It has saved me a couple times so far, and it's really taught me that I need to play more fog effects. I wasn't playing fog effects. I finally have started putting a fog effect card in almost any deck that can run it, and this is my favorite fog effect in the colors available from Mardu. A lot of people may say that at least the conventional pick should be Ink Shield, and I think Ink Shield has a very, very powerful explosive effect. That being said, 5 mana is just not practical to leave up. I think that is the biggest downfall of that card, and I think that's why it's going to stop seeing play. This is something that's much more manageable, much more practical. Just keep it up an Orzhov, and you can keep any damage away from you. When you're playing Burn or any aggro playstyle, you're going to deal damage to people. Megatron's innate ability is to destroy creatures. So whenever you're destroying creatures, people are going to be mad at you. You have to recognize that that's a part of the game. They're going to swing at you, and you need some way of protecting yourself and preventing combat damage, and even getting some retribution by dealing it back to them. This card is super slept on. I cannot believe it is one of the least played cards in this deck on EDH Rec. Insane to me. These last 3 cards of Paladin Dance, Sentry Bot, and Hunter's Blowgun, they're just weird. They're just weird. There are cards that I put in decks. I put in Hunter's Blowgun a lot, and I can't really explain why. I think I just love Death Touch. I love playing Rakdos, and I love just Death Touch, I guess. I don't know. I'm weird. Part of this is the syndrome of me rebuilding the energy precon, the energy fallout precon. So Sentry Bot comes from that, and Paladin Stance comes from that. Granted, I think Sentry Bot actually has some good use cases. It is a 5 CMC artifact that you can use as a sack outlet for Megatron to deal 5 damage to something, which is potentially 4 generic mana you're going to get on your second main, which is a sizable amount that you could potentially cast for just 1 white. Most of the time it's 3 to around that mana cost, because again, like I mentioned, you're going to have people swinging at you, and you're going to need to be able to have some sort of payoff for getting swung at least in my opinion. Paladin Dance is protection. He's not the best protection. He's not the worst protection. He's just kind of protection, I guess. He doesn't cost a lot, and I already had him on hand, so I just threw him into the deck. Plus, it's a flavor win. I mean, this is Megatron, so I'm not really sticking to any magic like IP or character. I also just love him. He's one of my favorite companions in Fallout 4. It is kind of a spoiler just seeing his creature type of Synth Paladin. If you haven't played the game, I'm sorry. But also that game's like 10 years old at this point, so go play Fallout 4 and play the Brotherhood of Steel questline. And lastly is Hunter's Blowgun. It's just okay. It's really mediocre. The great thing about Living Metal is that Megatron is not a creature on opponent's turn, so that he can't be targeted by creature removal, which is really, really, really strong. That being said, the drawback is that whenever you put equipment on him, it just falls off on your end step because he's no longer a creature. So you have to pay 2 mana every turn to put the Death Touch effect onto him. That being said, you sacrifice any artifact with 3 mana, you're pretty much mana neutral. You're killing something on a stick, just free removal. You can kind of forego the ramp part of it where you're blowing something up huge to get a ton of mana, but you still get to destroy anything, which is really, really solid. You could blow up an Arcane Signet and take out someone's 9/9 commander. That's just a pretty strong effect for only 3 mana or 2 mana and whatever you're sacrificing. So I think it does have a use case. It's maybe not the best. At worst, you just sacrifice the artifact. That's kind of how I look at it. All right, moving on to the next deck, narrowing down from the Mardu sphere that we were just talking about. We're going to cut the white and just get straight to the meat and potatoes of Rakdos Black-Red. And this deck is all about the things that I love, attacking and the graveyard. Alesha, Who Laughs at Fate, is a legendary creature coming from Foundations. First strike, raid, gets a +1/+1 counter. This is just everything I love about Commander. Attacking, cheap creatures, they die, graveyard, wonderful. I will say, out of all the games I've played with this, I have not won yet. I've played, I think, 7 games, and I have not won. So take whatever I say with a grain of salt. But every game that I play, except for 2, because I got land screwed, I've had fun in. So, my 5 most uncommon cards in this deck are Fires of Orthanc, Tomb Robber, Reinforced Ronin, Itali's Favor, and Circuit Mender. And those respectively being 10%, 10%, 10%, 11, 11. So very uncommon. Fires of Orthanc is a finisher card in the deck which functions as a way for me to get all my creatures through as long as they don't have any flyers. Which in the meta that I play in, I really don't play against that many flying decks, and if there are, it's like 1 or 2 creatures. It's not like an entire flying tribal like birds or spirits. I really just don't see that very often, so to me it's not a big deal. And I like that it gives me the flexibility of destroying an artifact or land. Paying 4 mana to destroy an artifact is not great, but the added benefit on top of it makes it worthwhile to me. I also just don't really play in a meta where lands are super game-changing. I don't play a lot of Gaia's Cradles or Cabal Coffers or anything of that sort, but it is nice to have in case I do play in a higher power pod where I need to have effects like that. I've also just found that in playtesting, a lot of the times that I can actually get all my creatures through without having to worry about blockers is how I win the game. I do have effects like Impact Tremors and Raid Bombardment, but frankly, those aren't always the best ways to get through. For example, one of the best cards in my deck at accomplishing this is Carter Doomscourge. Being able to goad everybody's creatures, make them all swing at each other, clears the lanes for me to get through with a finishing blow on at least 1 or 2 players. Next on the list is Tomb Robber, which is just a pet card of mine. I love Explore. One of my first sets I ever got into was Ixalan, so any Ixalan Plane set just has a special place in my heart. I just really love this card. It was one of my favorite cards in my Greasefang deck before I took it apart because I just wasn't playing it. But being able to put cards into the graveyard directly off the discard and then exploring, either potentially putting a land in your hand or deciding if you want to leave something on top and put it in the graveyard, is just super flexible, and it just allows for a lot of freedom in how you want to play the game and seeing what kind of information you have available. Anything that I can remotely call ramp and Rakdos, I'm going to take. Because me personally, I don't play Sol Ring. Maybe I should put Sol Ring in this deck because it needs it. But I need ramp. I need some ramp. Next is Itali's Favor, also on Ixalan. Good source of evasion, decent pump. And Discover 3 is really nice because a lot of stuff in this deck is very low to the ground. The average mana cost is very low, around 3. Frankly, I think it's just a solid card. Any evasion I think is good in this deck because whenever you're swinging with I feel like roughly a 5/5 first strike, they're just going to chump with whatever. So having trample is a good way to try and get through for more damage. Next is Reinforced Ronin, and this card is also a pet card. I love playing mono red in standard, and whenever I played the most online, I was spamming Reinforced Ronin. I think I had 3 copies of that in the deck because it's a 1-drop you can play, it bounces back to your hand, but it also has a channel ability to discard itself and draw a card, which is super great in this deck. You put a creature into the graveyard, draw a card, and it's something you can recur back to the battlefield, bounce to your hand, keep doing it. So it's a nice way to just keep getting recursible card draw while also getting that reanimation trigger. It's maybe not the best, but I love it. I love the card print, which I will show. It is super beautiful. It's one of my favorites. And lastly is Circuit Mender, which is another Kamigawa card, and another one I'm really surprised at. I'm frankly really surprised that this card is not in one of the EDH rec like top creatures. It's super cheap to the ground. You swing once with the Lesha, get the +1/+1 counter, and on that end step, you can reanimate this. Comes into play, you gain life, and whenever it leaves play, not just dies, leaves play, you draw a card, which is really, really solid. There's kind of just nothing to dislike about it, I feel. It's like Solemn Simulacrum, except it's cheaper. You can get it immediately off that Alesha trigger as long as it's in your graveyard. I really don't think there's much to hate here. I think that it's just a great, solid card, and it's pretty non-offensive. It's like the banana of the deck. Who doesn't like bananas? That's not offensive. But that's what we got for Alesha. We're going to move on to the final and my favorite deck. All right, last but certainly not least, my favorite deck at the moment is a Voltron Samurai deck, and it was based on my favorite film, Yojimbo. I actually made a YouTube video about how I made this deck and what story beats in the movie I really gravitated towards into building the deck, but it got copyright claimed by Toho Studios, so it will never see the light of day. It's in a Google Drive that some of my friends have seen, but yeah, that maybe whenever it enters the public domain in like 30 years, then the YouTube video will go up. But we're moving on. We're going on to Ryu Storm's Edge. So the deck primarily functions as Voltron. Put a ton of equipments on it, get a ton of extra combats, win the game through commander damage. Pretty simple. The 5 most uncommon cards in my deck list are You've Been Caught Stealing, which I'm almost certain I'm one of the only players, if not the only player, that runs this card in Ryu. Connecting the Dots, Descent into Avernus, Weathered Wayfarer, and Grim Reaper's Sprint. So of all the 5 sets of cards I've covered in this video, I think this set of Ryu has the highest ratio of very unpopular cards to my favorite cards that are in the deck. Let's start with Connecting the Dots. So with Connecting the Dots, every single time you attack with a creature, you exile the top card of your library, and then at a later point, you can pay mana to discard your hand and draw all the cards you've exiled with Connecting the Dots. And at first glance, it's like, why are you playing this in this deck? You're only attacking with one creature, really. It'd be a lot better in a deck like, I don't know, Annabelle, or even Alesha. But I think that this is really good because it's so cheap. You get it out early, you just swing, you still get 2 combats every time you swing. So if you're getting 2 combats every turn, 2 card draws potentially for later, and that really adds up. It's not a great enchantment removal option. I feel like generally there are much scarier enchantments to remove than this. So I think it's a pretty solid card. I think it's one of the most underrated cards of 2024 and a great card in red decks that care about combat. Highly recommended, and I'm going to put this in my Alesha deck once I get that copy coming in. Next is Descent into Avernus. This is just one of my favorite cards. I love Burn, and I love Group Slug, because you're making people treasures, and most of the time they're willing to take that damage for that treasure. This is also one of the cards that I've gotten the most, like, I read out what the card does, and everyone at the pod goes like, that's cool, I like that card. Which, you know, makes you feel good. Maybe people won't swing at you if you're playing cards that they like. But similarly, with Group Slug, you're lowering their life totals, speeding up the pace of the game, which can be a give and a take if you're playing against higher powered decks than this one. It can suck. I played at a deck where there was an Urza Lord High Artificer and a Kinnan Prodigy, and that wasn't great because they had, I feel like I don't need to say anymore. But there are a non-zero number of games where Descent of Avernus has lowered people into the red zone with Ryu, and with 2 combats, I can take 2 players out potentially. So I think this is a card that is really, really underrated. I think part of it is that the price has gone up. I got this before Obika, I think that's her name, the Outlaws of Thunder Junction commander that cares about your upkeep. I think she shot this card's price up a little bit. I was thankfully able to get it when it was cheaper, like $3. So I'm very grateful that I got it when I got it, because I think this is a great card and a banger in any red deck that wants to run it. Next is Weathered Wayfarer, which it's just here for ramp. I'm gonna be completely upfront. It is just ramp. But ramp and Boros, who else is gonna do it? You have to do it. You have to do it because there's some BS green player at that table. You know who they are. It's turn 3. They have 15 lands. They have 3 soul rings somehow. They're breaking the 1 of rule, and you need to catch up because god damn it, you can do it. Weathered Wayfarer is that card. And being able to search for any land, not even a basic land, is really strong. Say you need some evasion, go and find a Rogue's Passage. Say you need a haste enabler, go get Slayer's Stronghold. Say you just need to fix your colors, go get a Plateau, which is proxied, because I also don't have that much money. Definitely not for Plateau. Shout out Moonbliss Altars. Really great seller, go check them out on Etsy, especially if you love Dragon Ball Z or any anime altars, they're great. Can't recommend them highly enough, super nice service. I've never seen this card be bad, and worst case it's a blocker. Penultimate card here, Grim Reaper Sprint. I'm gonna be honest here, there's not really a whole lot going on. It's another combat step for pretty cheap. Usually it's only 2 mana, a 2 mana additional combat step that also pumps the commander is pretty solid. I'm not really gonna complain about that, especially because commander damage really adds up, and 2 extra commander damage can be the difference between a player being knocked out of the game or not. So I think this is a pretty great card. I also like it because it's Fallout. That's kind of a recurring theme, especially if you go and look at my Megatron deck, a lot of the prints are Fallout. It's just one of my favorite series, and I really like the Universes Beyond set. So another knock-in for Fallout. And last, but certainly not least, is the most uncommon card I'd reckon in this entire video, You've Been Caught Stealing. It's a moto spell with, you can either force all creatures to block this turn if able, or create treasures equal to the number of opponents dealt damage this turn. I'll be real, I have never cast the second mode of this spell. It's terrible at creating mana. It's terrible. It's maybe one of the worst treasure creator things in the game. You can pay 3 mana to make potentially 4 treasures. If you did it really well, in this deck it's impossible to do basically, but we don't care about that side. We care about the all creatures blocking, because that could potentially be a one-sided board wipe. You swing in, everything has to block, and if you have enough damage, especially if you're with double strike, you just untap on the next phase and kill them. You got a straight path through, which can be very, very, very nice. But the real reason this card is in the deck is because of the movie the deck is based on. Yojimbo is a samurai film made in 1961, directed by Akira Kurosawa, starring Toshiro Mifune, and it was a very impactful film for Japan, one of his best-selling films for Akira Kurosawa, and it would go on to inspire one of the most popular Western movies, In a Fistful of Dollars, directed by Sergio Leone, starring Clint Eastwood. 2 very, very great directors with great male leads, and I think Sergio Leone was very inspired by Yojimbo, even a little too inspired, some would see, as the movie became very clear that he just plagiarized the plot of Yojimbo. It is the exact same plot. It is incredible. You watch Yojimbo, you watch A Fistful of Dollars, and it's basically the same thing, just in different pasted environments of Japanese feudalism versus American West. And Sergio Leone got into a copyright dispute with Toho Studios. Akira Kurosawa said whenever he saw the movie of Fistful of Dollars, he said, "It's a fine film, but it's my film." So ergo, You've Been Caught Stealing. This is the card that is a jab at Sergio Leone and anyone else that decides to mess with Toshiro Mifune or Akira Kurosawa. Okay, I will be done rambling. That is my list of 5 most uncommon cards in each of my commander decks. I hope you enjoyed, and I hope this was a cool experiment for y'all to see, because it helped me reflect on what cards I have that are really uncommon and why I like playing them. Or there were some other cards like Experimental Augury or cards like Goblin Picker, which were in the first draft of this video, that I realized I don't really want them anymore. So this could be a cool exercise for you to go through as well with any commander decks that you have that maybe you want to brush up on, or you just want to revisit. So I hope you enjoyed, hope you have a great day, and take care.